Does the Ballon d'Or actually matter? Of course not. It's really just a popularity contest or PR campaign for individual players. We all know that. All right, now that we got rid of all those folks who are already complaining down in the comments or my DMs, let's talk a little bit about the nuance of this year's Ballon d'Or. Welcome to episode 727 of the Barcelona podcast, brought to you by the Blue Wire Podcast Network. I'm Dan Hilton, and while it is not a Ballon d'Or and a trophy, I sure would love one of those YouTube plaques. So if you can subscribe to the YouTube channel, that would be a big help. Become a member on Patreon for as low as $3, or help me out with a good rating on the podcast app. So those are all ways that I give a thumbs up to you. You also give a like and a comment on the YouTube videos. That also helps the almighty algorithm. And on Thursday, please join me on Big Up for the watch long against Real Oviedo. We're going to have some fun. We've been having a lot of fun already this season, and I want to continue to do that with our new fantasy game over on Big Up. Now let's try to take a more nuanced approach to the question, should you care about the Ballon d'Or? Before we get into the yes, let's make all those cynics happy and throw some water on the idea that, yeah, maybe we shouldn't care at all. For somebody like me who enjoys the history of it, well, that's actually where we run into our first roadblock. As there has been some work done retroactively to honor the likes of Pele and Maradona, non-Europeans playing out of Europe couldn't even win the award until 2007. For the longest time, it was the European Footballer of the Year, and only players from Europe could win it. Then in 1995, yes, 1995, it was opened up to players from anywhere, but you had to be active at a European club. Then in 2007, it was opened up to everybody at any club, and of course now, with the hegemony that is European football, only players who are playing for clubs in Europe are generally going to win this competition until something radically changes in world football. Then there is the fact there is also no real criteria for these awards. These are voted on by individual people with their individual biases. Because if it was just down to goal contributions, then Rafinha, who set goal contribution records that we haven't seen since, and I do mean only Messi and Cristiano Ronaldo, well, then he probably wouldn't have finished fifth. He would have finished first. He had 34 goals and 25 assists in 57 games compared to the 17 and 25 from Lamine Yamal in 2 less games. I was a little surprised that Rafinha didn't even finish top 3 with those numbers, but then again, the Champions League winners got 2 in the top 3 with Vitinha joining the winner in Dembélé. And Mohamed Salah, who won the EPL title with Liverpool, finished 4th. And I think why Salah probably beat out Rafinha in the rankings for a lot of voters is because, yeah, it is EPL centric in terms of the leagues that are watched in Europe or abroad. And so, yes, you needed to have some kind of representative for one of those teams in the EPL and the one that in Liverpool that ran away with it. Rafinha, though, for Barcelona, of course, won the domestic treble, but Lamine Yamal gets the credit, or the Barcelona credit, by finishing second. The biggest injustice to me from the voting was Pedri finishing 11th, behind Hakimi, Mbappe, Cole Palmer, Donnarumma, and Nuno Mendes. That lists a bunch of PSG players, plus Real Madrid and Chelsea representatives. It should be noted that voters vote for the top 5, so anything outside of that isn't really the biggest deal. But if anybody was actually watching, Pedri was the best midfielder in world football last season. But he wasn't rewarded like it looking at these rankings. But the fact that we can split hairs on where players wound up on that list, it does kind of tell you that this thing is a bit arbitrary, and the real fun only comes in the discourse and the memes and all that stuff, which, again, I don't really like social media. It's not too much fun for me. And finally, the biggest thumbs down for why you should care is that, well, Ligue 1 and the team whose representative won the Ballon d'Or didn't so much as care. Yes, they did initially not have the PSG against Marseille in Le Classique, which is the largest match in France. They originally didn't have that on the schedule to take place during the Ballon d'Or ceremony. But the fact that that match, even being delayed by a day, probably could have been better prepared for on the schedule in advance. There are also some big name players missing at the ceremony, like Pedri or Erling Haaland. So if the players don't make time for the fanfare, well, then should the fans be making time for the fanfare? And should you make time for the fanfare? Well, those are the reasons why you shouldn't care, but let's talk a little bit about the reasons why you should care. I spoke before about the historical context being a reason why maybe you shouldn't care, but I also think that the historical context is that the winner of the Ballon d'Or is a good snapshot of where we are in world football at the moment, or at least in European football at that moment. The best team doesn't always win the Champions League, and the best player that season doesn't always win the Ballon d'Or. Pavel Nedved beat Thierry Henry in 2003. I mean, come on. And then Luka Modric winning in 2018 may not have been the most deserving either, but he did win by quite a few votes, and what he did in the World Cup was a big reason for him winning that. But still, it's a snapshot as to what happened that year, because now you got me talking about the 2018 World Cup. Which brings us to this season, where I do actually think Ousmane Dembélé winning this award was the best snapshot of where football was in Europe just last season. He was the best player on the best team when the Champions League was raised. And there was no major international competition that involved the European teams. So that was that. Don't tell me about the Nations League with Lamine Yamal scoring and Spain beating France. No. One match is not going to decide the Ballon d'Or. Taking this from a Kool-Aid's perspective, the real shock for Kool-Aid's is that none of us could have believed that the player that could never stay healthy and always seemed to be losing the ball in inopportune spots is now the Ballon d'Or winner. But watching him under Xavi that last year, it's not that crazy. He was the most vital piece of the puzzle for Xavi, and if not for Lamine Yamal breaking out the way he has, we'd likely be talking about how Barcelona still hasn't replaced his production on that wing and the game-breaking ability that he has. You can check the tapes from way back when we started this show, Francesc Tomas and I, and we talked about a young winger from Borussia Dortmund who looked like Barcelona were going to spend some of that Neymar money on, and they did. At the time, he was arguably the top wing prospect in world football. Now, Dybala was also somewhere on that list, but he was more of a central figure than a winger. And so when it came to teenage wingers, that was the name to know. Him winning is a reminder that no path is linear, and it winds up being a really good story for a player that was able to put aside the injuries and maybe some of the immaturity off the field that may have been following him as well. Nothing too bad, but things that just kept him from being his best. So that was a half decade ago, and now he's a man that stands in front of us with a Ballon d'Or. And as I said, Lamine Yamal would have deserved it, but Ousmane Dembélé also definitely deserved the award this year. But people will say, was Dembélé better than Lamine Yamal last season? Having watched a bunch of PSG and every Barcelona match in a lot of detail, my answer is no. I don't think so. I think Lamine Yamal was the better player than Dembélé last season. But the reaction from Kool-Aid's does seem to be overwhelmingly one of acceptance that Lamine Yamal didn't win this award, because it wouldn't be shocking if Lamine Yamal was holding that trophy someday, maybe even more than once and maybe sooner than you think. To be just 18 and finishing second in the Ballon d'Or is pretty much unprecedented, with the exception of Michael Owen trying to be around that age and Messi even 22 when he won it. But I always say you never know when it comes to the future. You'd think that Mbappe would have won one by now, but here we are, and Dembélé has one, Mbappe doesn't. Health and team success are huge factors of how to win that individual award, and you think that Lamine Yamal is going to have enough bites at the apple to have that success even as soon as this coming year. And there is some peace in knowing that Lamine Yamal's time, it does feel like it will come. But I also wouldn't have been that upset if he had won it this year. I don't think it's too early for him. I think the media overdoes that stuff about Lamine Yamal having this crazy life off the field. If he was the best in the world, give him the award. He did at least win the Copa Trophy for the second straight season. And if he wasn't good enough to win the Ballon d'Or, as in all the off-field stuff and the stuff in between the ears, if he doesn't want to be the best in the world the way that Messi does and Ronaldo does, if he doesn't want to be the best in the world, then he won't be the best in the world. I don't think winning that trophy is going to completely throw him off course. And for him winning the Copa Trophy for the second straight season, well, I think you should probably already just line him up for winning the Young Player in the World award for next season as well, because, yeah, he'll just be 19 next season. As long as he can come back healthy, that's his award to lose. And while I don't mean to give shallow congratulations to Lamine Yamal on the Copa Trophy, his wasn't even the most exciting Copa Trophy that Barcelona won. That one went to Vicky Lopez, where on the women's side of things were a little bit closer in that voting. The 19-year-old midfielder, Vicky Lopez, beat out competition from Michelle Agiman from England and Arsenal, and Linda Caicedo from Colombia and Real Madrid. Ewa Pajor, meanwhile, picked up the Gerard Muller Trophy for the top scorer, something that unfortunately for Lewandowski just barely evaded him. And I saved the best for last, and the reason why you should care about the Ballon d'Or this season, history was made on the women's side of things as Aitana Bonmati won her third straight Ballon d'Or on the women's side of things. And while it was deserved, it was the narrowest margin that she has won by yet. The last two seasons with Barcelona flying high in the Champions League, it was always going to go to a Barcelona player. They were the dominant team in world football. But this season, things were a bit closer. With Barcelona failing to win the Champions League, former teammate and runner-up Mariona Caldente, a player that I really have always said I loved watching, really enjoy watching her. She no longer plays for Barcelona. She now plays for Champions League winning side Arsenal. She was the one who had the strongest argument of anybody in world football. But in the end, it was Aitana again, as she was the most consistently best player to me last season as well. She was joined in the top 15 by Alexia, who finished 4th, Patry, who finished 6th, Ewa Bajor, who finished 8th, Claudia Pina, who finished 11th, and Caroline Grant-Hansen, who finished 13th. So yes, Barcelona were all over the top 15. They did get to a Champions League final, and as they have been doing for the last half decade, they dominated the domestic side of things, winning every possible trophy you could in Spain. So the reason why you should care about the Ballon d'Or isn't because of the PR and individual awards, but the fact that it is a snapshot as to where world football is at the moment. And for the feminine stuff, that is where Barcelona is at this moment. They are flying high, even though they lost the Champions League final. They keep getting back there. They are the dominant side, and as long as the club continues to invest in the Femení, something they didn't necessarily do this summer, well, they're going to still have success. And Lamine Yamal, if Barcelona continues to work through his environment and continue to foster his growth, then he should have a Ballon d'Or before you know it. His time will come. And I hope that the time does come for you to subscribe to the YouTube channel, help me out on the podcast apps, become a member on Patreon, or join me on Thursday on Big Up for that watch along for Real Viedo. So I will see you then, and until next time, for Barca.